Okay. All right. Well, here we go.
Nice.
Chat. You see that? I'll click that there. Okay. So people are rolling in. If there's any sign of Mr. Dunn. Good evening, everyone. We're going to start in just a second, waiting for a few people's computers to load. We are going to record this tasting and post it on YouTube later, but your image will not be shared. It's only going to be speaker view. So Ranald and I will be shown. But since Ranald has joined us in the wee hours of the morning, all the way from Scotland, if you'd be so willing as to turn your cameras on, I'm sure he would appreciate that. What else? If you have questions, comments as we go through the tasting, please put them into the chat. And if Randall doesn't catch them, I'll be sure to bring them up. I think that's about it. There's still a handful of people in the waiting room, so we'll just give it another minute before we get going. Oh, and it looks like Andy has successfully joined us. I know he was having some issues. Our friend Andy Dunn, who is the long-serving Springbank Cadenhead Kilkerran importer to Canada, is watching the tasting as well too. But there, I think that we've got. Oh no, there's even more people keep showing up. So, Ranald, I swear we're gonna get started in just a minute here. We'll say, I guess maybe happy early Canada Day to everybody while we're waiting for people to join. No, that's coming up next week. I'm sure most of you are aware of this, but if this is your first time doing a virtual tasting with us, we do a bunch of these through the store as well too, which are worth checking out. And there will be another Springbank tasting like this. I'm guessing either late this year or early next, because there is another tasting kit that is getting boxed up for delivery at some point. So we'll give Springbank Society members first crack at that again. But it looks like everybody who's trying to get in is in. So thanks for joining us tonight. I want to say a big thank you to Springbank and Ranald Watson, who's the group sales director for J&A Mitchell and Co., or J.A. Mitchell and Co., which is the parent company for Springbank, Kilkerran, and Cadenheads. I know people get really sticky, Ranald, about the pronunciation of Cadenhead or Cadenhead. Do you want to set the record straight on that? Because it's all
Yeah.
over the map.
It's all over the map within the office as well, to be honest. But it's been Cadenheads since I can remember. I think the Cadenhead thing might have actually originated in Aberdeen with the business, but then as it's moved south and west over time, Cadenheads is the way we go.
So Cadenhead is the Doric way of saying it, and Cadenheads is the
The
Celtic, the
Lowlanders or
West
the
Coast way.
Campbelltown. Yeah,
There you go.
exactly.
Well, Ranald, appreciate you doing this. Appreciate you staying up late with us to try some whiskeys. We've got 6 whiskeys to go through tonight from Springbank and Kilkerran. And if we're going to do the order as it was laid out here, we're starting with the 18-year-old, which is not often that we start a tasting with an 18-year-old whiskey, let alone an 18-year-old Springbank. So I'll put it up on the screen here. And I guess maybe we'll let people wet their lips a little bit with this first one. But then if you want, I don't know if you want to give, I think most people know a lot about Springbank on this tasting, to be fair. But maybe
Yeah.
there might be some little tidbits that they don't know, or maybe some of the new things that have happened in recent years, because there have been some changes, might be of interest for people to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the most significant change over the last couple of years hasn't necessarily directly related to the whiskey. It's really been the transition, if you can call it that, from being very much a family-owned company to being now a company where the majority of its shares are held in trust fund, because
Mhm.
our long-standing chairman and majority shareholder Headley Wright passed away in August 2023. And as he did so, leaving his shares to the three trust funds that now own the majority of the business. So that's been a big change behind the scenes. It's had no sort of material effect on how we do things, because we've been doing things the same way for so long, we'd never change them. But the kind of setup of the company is a little bit different. So we're not quite owned by the community, but we're very much run with the community in mind. So basically,
Mhm.
all the profits from the distillery are now being almost directly distributed to the community in Campbelltown, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of people will know the story that Headley set up this structure because the town was very important to him. I think you've always felt very grateful for what it had done for he and his family,
Yeah.
and that this was his way of trying to give back and ensure that that legacy would live on. And yeah, I mean, change happens. I mean, I think it happens to everything, but even though, you're going through some change, I mean, ultimately, uh, all of this is very gradual. I mean, I think one of the things about Springbank and one of the things people love, even if it's sometimes mildly frustrating, is that you're very true to your roots and you don't make, massive changes right at once.
No, no, absolutely. And even the growth that we've had as a company has been, I don't know whether the right economic term, but it's not really been vertical growth. We've kind of grown across the way. So although we produce more whiskey now than we used to, we
Hmm.
doubled our production, what, 7 years ago now? But two times zero is still zero. So we still don't produce a huge amount. I think at Springbank this year, we'll probably distill about 250, 260,000 litres of alcohol. So
Hmm.
we deliberately keep it small because that's how we know to do it. We couldn't do it another way even if we wanted to, and we certainly don't want to. So it's about, you know, growing the business in a sustainable way, basically to employ as many people as we can. I think
Hmm.
we're at 116 employees now, which is huge for a town that's only got 4,500 or 5,000 people in it. And that's the aim, is to run the business in a sustainable way, to create as many jobs as we can, but jobs that will be there forever, not just jobs that will be there for a boom or a bust period.
Hmm.
And we'd always said, when things were really good in the Scotch whisky business, that we knew we wouldn't have enough whisky to satisfy demand. But if and when, and as they probably are turning, we'll still be able to sell the product that we've got in order to support the jobs that we've created, and that's the key thing.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, let's dive into the 18-year-old here, Ranald. And I'm noticing right off the bat, like this is a little different than some recent batches of 18-year-old that I can recall. And I think the reason's going to be pretty obvious when people look at the screen here. This is 100% bourbon cask 18-year-old this year.
yeah, yeah, and it's I don't want to say it's all the better for it, but to my personal taste, I think this is just superb. We always have this conversation when we're sort of looking at the casks that we're going to use for any product, but particularly the older Springbanks, the ones that are in the really small volume. To a degree, you're only working with the casks that are left over from previous bottlings or whatever. By the time our whiskey gets to 18, we've already extracted quite a lot to use as 10, 12, 15. But when you're working with a small parcel of casks, you've got to pay really close attention to each one when you're putting it's not the blend, but when you're doing the marriage of the casks. And when Finlay Ross and I sit down to do this, Finlay's our production director, but we've got very, very similar tastes. We both enjoy the same kind of wines, the same kind of beers. We like our whiskey the same way, and we both absolutely love our Springbank straight from bourbon casks.
Mhm.
So we're always kind of mindful not just to bottle everything that we think is great. You're aware that other people maybe like a bit of sherry or whatever. But when we got the chance to do 100% bourbon 18, we were all over it. We were like, yeah, we're going to do it, because it's perfect aged Springbank. It's got all the typical
Mhm.
salty, briny, tropical fruit, coconut thing that you get in Springbank, but it's just that little bit more refined because it's that little bit older than the regular stuff.
Well, I think we've seen quite a few of the 21s have been fairly heavily bourbon cask influenced, but the 18, I think, for as long as I can remember, was at least if not majority sherry, then like very heavily influenced by it. So I think this is a great, it's nice to see things evolve. We talk about this, a lot of friends who are big Springbank fans. And I noticed there's a lot of chatter about people being on the waiting list for whiskey
Mm.
school. And Ranald, you and I were talking about this just before we got started. I had a couple of buddies from Calgary who were just at whiskey school a couple weeks back and absolutely loved it. Everyone I know who's done that recommends it highly. But when we're talking about this a lot, one of the things we love about Springbank is that I think you embrace the fact that the whiskey is never perfectly the same and
Mm.
there's batch variation. And I think people love that batch variation because, there's some parcels that speak to some people of 15 or 10, and then there's others that speak to other people. And I think the fact that ultimately you're just looking to bottle good whiskey and that can evolve over time, I think is something that resonates with the type of people that genuinely really love brands like Springbank.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I appreciate you saying that because we think we've got a reasonably good connection with our drinkers. There's not a whole load of difference between the guys who are working at the company and the people who are buying our whiskies, because I think we are in tune with that. Like, we understand that, the typical person who's logging on at 5 o'clock on a Friday night for a Springbank tasting will embrace batch variation, will embrace
Mhm.
the varieties of things that we do and the reasons for them, which is quite important as well. A lot of the production aspects of what we're doing, floor malting, long fermentation times, open top mash tuns, that kind of stuff, it all promotes variety in flavour. There's nothing
Mhm.
standard about any of that. So you're never going to get your whiskey to be 100% the same anyway. So leaning into that and being aware that as long as it's good, it's okay
Mhm.
that it's different. Because I don't think anyone's buying a bottle of Springbank 18 and expecting it to be the same every time.
Mhm.
So yeah, lean into it as much as you need to.
Yeah, no, and I think that is the right approach for this. And I suppose it also allows you to look at, I know cask management, it's far more complex than just like what ratios of different things do you have, but it's also a matter of how much of X can we bottle each year so that,
Mm-hmm.
we can grow our offerings to the market slowly over time, which I know is a strategy that's been really important to Springbank for a very long time. And it might mean that there are some years where maybe the only way you can offer enough 18 to the market is to tweak things a little bit or do things a little differently from one year to the next. Which
Yeah.
actually brings up a point, because this is a question I've been getting from people a fair bit lately. There's kind of a pause on Hazelburn for a year or two, isn't there? That
Mm.
there's kind of a shortage of it.
Yeah, there was a slight pause in production of Hazelburn 10 to 12 years ago, um, which we're still not entirely sure how it came to be that we made probably extra long roll for 2 or 3 years there and didn't make any Hazelburn. So we're just kind of working our way through that kind of small gap in production. For a while, we were bottling, Hazelburn 10, 100% bourbon matured. And it was actually getting up to being about 13 or 14 years old, the whiskey we were using for that. Which again, um, in a very basic world, well, why wouldn't we just call it 13 or 14 years old and charge a few extra quid a bottle? But, even as a small company, you've still got to have some kind of consistency in what your product range is. So it
Mhm.
kind of got to the point where we either had to try and replace the 10-year-old with a 12, but then this gap that we've had for about 18 months with no stock would actually have become an even longer gap. So we just decided to kind of not have any for a while to let the whiskey catch up to the age we wanted to bottle it at.
Mhm.
And that's the real um, issue that low production causes you. It's hard to cover gaps. So the job really should be to try and not have any gaps in your inventory if you can, but sometimes it happens for whatever reason.
Well, and you're relying on decisions made 10, 12, 15 years ago that
Yeah.
are now out of your control. Some nice comments in the chat here. Some people saying, including Steve out in the coast, saying that he tried this against a 2022 batch that was more sherried and he likes this
Mm-hmm.
one better. Comments about the tropical notes, which this is definitely very tropical, but also, I mean, it's a little, I almost, and I don't mean this as a negative at all. People who know me and watch these tastings know that I don't. It's a touch on the naked side, so it's quite spirit
Mm-hmm.
forward. And I
Yeah.
think one of the things that allows you to see, which you don't often in older Springbanks because of time, is that funky coastal Campbellton sort of profile shining
Yeah.
through, whether it's in the grassy barley notes, the tropical fruit, or maybe some other notes.
Yeah, I think that's bang on, and it's part of the reason why I like doing our older bottlings from almost exclusively bourbon if we can, because you do get the distillery character coming through,
Mhm.
and you know, as I said, everything we're doing in the production of the spirit itself creates flavor, creates character. So if you can let that carry on through 18, 21, 25 years, then I think that's a really positive thing. I mean, our new make, if anyone gets the chance or has had the chance to try our new make, it's a really distinctive new make spirit we've got. Yeah, it's fruity like a lot of them, and yeah, it's a bit sweet like a lot of them, but it's got a lot more to it than just that. And if that can carry through the 18 years, then I think that's a great sign of the size of the character, but also the quality of the character that you're creating. So yeah, why not
Mhm.
bottle it like that? I agree that I think this is, for me anyway, more to my taste than some of the more sherried ones, but
Mhm.
um, that's, that's good stuff.
Well, I think it seems like you're in good company on that one there. Well, let's move on to the 21. And I'll pop this up on the screen. I'm assuming that this is the 2024 that we have here, which is thankfully what is currently up on your website.
Yeah,
Um, I'm sure it's not long but until some of these get bottled and replaced, but 2024 edition, 65% port, 25% bourbon, 5% rum, 5% sherry. Thinking about this now, I do remember when we did a tasting, I think early this year or late last year with this 21 in it. Well, I was reminded by like, the 21 going back in time was almost always bourbon and sherry. And then in the last 4 or 5 years, we started seeing more, port creeping in, rum creeping in, and some of which have been, quite heavy on one or the other of those. So this was interesting, and I know that this was quite a conversation started the last time we had it. And the reason I remember it is that combination of the port and the bourbon almost comes across like a little bit rummy. Like it's sort of
mm.
giving off this rum-like note to it on the nose.
Yeah, it's definitely different. Um, and again, it kind of fits in a little bit with what you're just saying about kind of working with what other people have left for you.
Hmm.
Um, but it's not as straightforward as going, oh well, that's the parcel of casks that we've got. Just chuck them all together and it'll be fine. Because you do have to try and make sure there's a balance and that one complements the other. And I think it's pretty interesting if you reckon that such a big port influence and some bourbon on top of that does have that rum note.
Hmm.
The quantity of rum casks in this. I mean, we do what 3,500 bottles or so of 21-year-old a year. So
Hmm.
when we say 5% of that is rum matured, really not. It's not a lot. It's like
It's like
one
one
cask or something.
one cask. Yeah.
Yeah. So the fact that the flavour is so reminiscent of a rum can only be coming from the combination of everything that's happening. It's not one hugely active cask that's dominating everything else.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think some of the more heavily sherried 21s, and I actually find this about some of even the old original 21-year-old Springbacks. I find that when they're so sherry cask dominated at that age, they can be great whiskies, but they're not necessarily great Springbanks.
Hmm.
Some of that distillery character, that distinctiveness, doesn't necessarily make its way through.
Hmm.
Whereas with this, the balance there'll be quite a high proportion of refill casks in
Hmm.
here as well. So it's allowing the distillery to speak.
Um, I'm glad you brought that up about some of those old Springbanks because I have really fond memories from the really mid 2000s, early to mid 2000s, when there were Springbank 21s in the market. And the story back then was that those whiskeys were actually quite a bit older than 21 years of
Yeah.
age. They were just for consistency or for ease of importing in certain markets, they just decided, well, we'll call it 21, and then we'll,
Mhm.
possibly, even if it's much older. And the best of those were all bourbon cask, and they were just
Yeah,
tropical, waxy, just like really, really expressive. And I'm a fan of the sherry cask too. I remember when the first modern 25 came out, and it was in that. I don't know
mm,
if this was before your time or not, Randall, but it was in that faux leather brown kind of box with a plastic window on it. And I
yeah.
think it was quite heavily sherried, and that was a bit of a departure. It was sort of a surprise because what we'd seen for these older Springbanks, for most of them, had been bourbon cask.
Yeah, I think that was 2005, if I remember rightly. That was bottled. I joined the company in 2006, but in those days, whiskey didn't sell out in 5 minutes, so we still had plenty of it. I remember you used to be able to come on a tour of the distillery, and you could only uh, one tour a day. I think we had a 2 p.m. tour in the afternoon, and I joined because we were looking to get more people to hang about and do tastings and that kind of stuff. So we offered gold, silver, or bronze tastings. And the bronze tasting was you got a Springbank 10, it would have been a long row 10 at that point, and a Hazelburn 8. That was your 3 drams in the bronze
Mhm.
tasting. Silver tasting, you went up to long row 14, Springbank 15. You got a Hazelburn from one of the wee casks we had in the tasting room at that time. And then if you did the gold tasting, um, you could get 32-year-old Springbank or 25-year-old Springbank, depending on whichever one I wanted to pour. And I was like straight in the door going, yeah, we're just pouring this 32-year-old. That's fine. Oh, yeah, today I will do the 25. And you kind of, at that point, didn't really foresee what was coming. But yeah, you were just pouring out all this really good old stuff that was, I think the 32-year-old was £180 a bottle at the distillery. And the
Yeah,
25-year-old was like 120 or something. And you felt guilty charging that amount of money for a bottle of whiskey in those days.
they
Um,
were they were more innocent times back then.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I think this 21 is lovely. I mean, on a personal level, I think I pine more for those ex-bourbon 21s. And I remember there was one that was like very heavy on rum. Like it was almost
Mm,
like 75 or 80% rum cask was one of my favorites. And not because of the rum influence, but because of the fact that when you strip back what is a rum cask, it's a cask that's been used to make bourbon and then rum, and then it finds its way to Scotland. So it's at very least you'd consider it to be like a refill single malt barrel. Like it's been
yeah.
used at least twice. And because of that, you get more delicate flavors, you get more subtle flavors developing. And I don't know, I find there's a greater elegance to that, which is not to take anything away from this. I really like this. And Ranald, I'm someone people who've done a lot of our tastings will know because I say this too often. I generally don't like port casks. I find that port
Mm,
casks, probably because a lot of producers are not treating them well, the
yeah.
whiskeys are really funky and acidic, and I just don't like the profile. But on this one, it works out. These are the notes are clean. It's very chocolatey. There's a nice richness to it too.
Yeah. I think we've used a variety of cask types over the year for Springbank and Longrow, Hazelburn, Kilkerran, and emphasised even more so, I think, when you look at some of the stuff we do at Cadenheads. Um, the For me anyway, to use things like port or Madeira or something a bit more uh, heavy on the influence it'll give the whiskey, to work well, I think the whiskey needs to have a strong enough character to work with something like the influence of the port cask. I don't know how many casks we own for Cadenheads, but we re-rack a few for variety, sometimes to try and improve them or whatever. But you're always really wary of using port casks with distilleries from that kind of lighter flavour profile side of things. If you're using something from Islay or a Campbelltown or one of the bigger, like Dalhousie, something a bit bigger and meatier, it can work. But sometimes with a softer whiskey, I'm the same as you. I think port casks are a bit questionable. But yeah, I
Mhm.
also agree that they're all right in here.
Yeah. Going back to something you said earlier, to a certain extent, as the, managers of the distillery now, you have to kind of work with what prior people did for you. And I mean, obviously the person who would have been there around the time that this was being produced or come there was Frank McCarty. And I know
Yeah,
the oak situation before he arrived was maybe not in the best of shape. And he did a lot to rejuvenate it. And I know that there was a lot of really good sherry casks that started coming out in the late from distillate from the late 90s, because that
yeah,
was when he got in and started wielding some influence over that. But it's interesting to think about that, and not knowing that I guess next year is your 20th year at Springbank, which is pretty incredible.
terrifying in many ways.
Well, I mean, I guess it's the sort of company that you're well looked after. It's probably hard to leave. And although I'm sure you're among the oldest serving employees there, I have no doubt there's probably people that have been there even longer. Um,
Yeah,
just by virtue of the fact that, Springbank is such an important part of the community, and as you said, the biggest employer in the town.
yeah, yeah. And we try to, to make our jobs as attractive as possible, and we're pretty big on rewarding long service. There's a number of things we do for staff who've been around a long time, from pension contributions, extra holidays, bonuses, that kind of stuff, because we do recognise that there's a hell of a lot of expertise that is gained through experience. So you've got
Mhm,
to look after your people, or you don't really have anything.
mhm. Let's go on to the 16 round. I'll switch websites here because we are going to Kilkerran from the Glengyle distillery. This is probably the one that maybe people don't know quite as much about. Sort of like the step brother to Springbank. But this is the 2024 edition of 16-year-old. And it is a mix of bourbon, sherry, and rum casks, bottled at 46%, with the famous window there overlooking the namesake church. So yeah, Ranald, do you want to maybe give people just a quick refresher on Kilkerran?
Yeah, sure. So Kilkerran, Glengyle was the distillery that was effectively built, depending on your point of view, either to win an argument or to secure Campbelltown's place on the whisky map, because the Headley Wright, our late chairman, was a great, as we said, proponent of all things Campbelltown and fiercely protective of the place, but also of his own opinions. And so when the Scotch Whisky Association started to suggest in the late 90s that maybe Campbelltown shouldn't be considered a whisky region because they only had two distilleries, to cut a pretty long story short, he built another one just to prove that Campbelltown should be on the whisky map. And in fairness to him, he put his hand in his pocket and won the argument.
Yeah.
So it was a good job, well done. So between Headley and Frank, they set about building the new Glengyle distillery on the site of what had been the original distillery. The original distillery ran from 1872 until 1925, and it had been set up by a guy called William Mitchell, who was the little brother of John Mitchell of Springbank at that time. So the distillery closed in 1925 amidst the general downturn in Campbelltown whisky at that point. So Headley and Frank resurrected it nearly 80 years later. So it reopened in 2004, started to produce spirit, and for the first 13 or 14 years of its life, we only distilled up there 6 weeks of the year. It's only, I don't know, 100 metres along the road from Springbank. It's more or less on the same site. So we just borrow the production staff from Springbank to go in and operate it. So did that for 6 weeks a year up until 2018, and then we, along with the doubling the production at Springbank, we doubled production of Kilkerran as well to 12 weeks a year. So that gives us about 90 to 100,000 litres of alcohol. It's a much more modern distillery than Springbank. Springbank's cobwebs and stone floors and all that kind of stuff, whereas Glengyle or Kilkerran's kind of stainless steel and all that kind of thing. But you still get the same level of production knowledge and whiskey experience that goes into producing it as you do at Springbank. But they're
Mhm.
very, very different distilleries. And so
Yeah,
we,
quite a different profile to them.
mm,
Sort of to round out on what you said before, I love telling people in tastings that Kilkerran And I think there actually might be another, but it's the best example, is the only distillery built out of spite. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think in some ways though, I think you guys should lean into that version of it because in some ways it's just true to Headley's character and the pride that he had for his family business and the town and felt they weren't being given their due, so he took it into his hands to
Mm.
remedy the situation. And
Yeah, absolutely.
anyway, while we're nosing this, you know, Kilkerran, you've done some changes in order to grow your production at Kilkerran, which I think is phenomenal, means you're not going to be able to supply it with floor malted barley from Springbank the way you were in the past. Do you want to touch on that maybe a little bit for people here?
Sure. Yeah. So up until probably 5 or 6 years ago, all of the malting for Kilkerran was done at Springbank on the traditional malt floors, treated exactly the same way as the malt we were preparing for Springbank, so peated to the same level, 12 to 15 parts per million. And then as we wanted to grow that production, malting became a real bottleneck because we now malt 48 weeks of the year at Springbank. We distill 36 weeks of the year at Springbank. So there is that kind of 12 weeks worth of malt potentially available to us. But in order to be able to do a bit more Kilkerran, we decided that rather than expanding our malting capacity at Springbank, because it's hard to expand malt floors, for the heavily peated Kilkerran, we would buy in some commercially produced malt. And we also make an unpeated whiskey at Kilkerran. We don't actually bottle any of that as Kilkerran at the moment, and I don't know that we've got any massive plans to. We actually use that as the backbone for Campbelltown Loch, our blended malt that contains
Mhm.
all three distilleries in Campbelltown, all five single malts. So to make that extra heavily peated stuff and to make the unpeated, we buy in some commercial malt. The long term, don't know if it's fair to call it a plan. It's maybe still an aspiration at this stage, but the long term aspiration is to have a malting facility for Kilkerran exclusively,
Mhm.
which is a plan we're kind of working away on in the background to
Yeah.
figure out the best way to do it and the best time to do it. Whether it's another malt floor, whether it's a malt drum, whether it's something else entirely. It's a bit
Mhm.
of an ongoing conversation.
Well, and I imagine that with the way things are going in the industry right now, probably in the short term, the cheapest option is to take advantage of capacity that commercial maltsters have for you. But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it would be pretty cool to have a like a drum maltings or something in Campbellton, but at the end of the day, like all these things have to be paid for.
Yeah, and we're in the middle of, well, I'd say in the middle, hopefully coming towards the end of building a brand new bottling facility, which is a 4.5 to 5 million pound investment. So that's kind of taken up a lot of our spare cash at the moment. So once that's finished and paid for, which hopefully less than a year from now will be the case, then we start looking at our next big inward investment project, and
Hmm.
the fight will be a malting facility or additional warehousing, which we're also in dire need of, or another distillery. So we're really at all points in the spectrum of things that we might do next, and it kind of
Yeah,
depends whose voice is loudest, which one we'll do. But
yeah. So, I mean, and the another distillery is kind of an enticing thought, but
mm,
um, the advice that I would give for people contemplating that is to wait 5 years and buy someone else out of insolvency because
yeah, absolutely,
that's happening. It's going to happen. So,
yeah,
whether maybe
definitely,
not in Campbellton, but in other parts, there will be quite a bit of that. So,
yeah,
um,
no, for sure.
lots of good comments on the, the Kilkerran 16. I love that several people are comparing them to past batches that they've got
Mm,
kicking around. I think the things that really strike me about the Kilkerran is it's so much more mineralistic than the Springbank distillate. And maybe that's because it's double distilled instead of
yeah,
triple distilled. Uh, quite a bit of comments about how fatty it is as well too. And I think it definitely has
mm.
some of that. It's quite coating and thick, and it does have a really nice mouthfeel.
Yeah. I speak to more and more people who are starting to come to the opinion that they prefer Kilkerran style to Springbank. Now, how much of that is availability led? They've maybe not had the chance to have any Springbank for long enough. But I think it was important to us when the distillery was built, and certainly once we started bottling the whiskey, that it wasn't just replica Springbank, because even to build a distillery out of spite or to win an argument or whatever would be a bit crazy to do that and then just make exactly the same thing again. But the
Mhm.
challenge was, how do you make it
Mhm.
significantly different? How much of a part in the final whiskey is Campbelltown's environment going to play in it? So how different do you need to make your spirit so that even though it's got exactly the same maturation as your Springbank does, but the actual whiskey is still going to be different? And I think Frank
Mhm.
has done an incredible job, because we've not changed a huge amount in our production since Frank retired. Why would you? Because the whiskey you're producing is pretty decent. So it's
Mhm.
testament to the production methods and the way he built the distillery that the whiskey is as good as it is, while being pretty identifiably different to the one down the road.
Mhm. I mean, obviously there are some things that are like the stills are different.
Yeah.
But the washbacks, you have wooden washbacks as you do at Springbank. How different are things like your fermentation times and the yeast you use? Like, are those similar or the same?
Yeast is exactly the same. Fermentation time's a little shorter at Glengyle, just to fit in with the um, effectively you're doing a double distillation, so you can actually do a little bit more distillation in a week at
Mhm.
Glengyle than you can at Springbank, because that extra half distillation step at Springbank effectively takes you 50% longer. So you can fit an extra distillation run almost in at Glengyle. So the fermentation's a bit shorter. The mashing is slightly quicker, but probably more efficient, because it's in the semi-lauter tun with the roof on, or the lid on top of the mash tun. So you're maybe extracting a bit more sugar uh, from your
Mhm.
from your grains at Kilkerran. So it's just that little bit, not quicker. That's not the right way to say it, but things just happen at a slightly different pace. And then when you get to the double distillation, I think that does change quite a bit of the character, even though the line arm of both the wash still and the spirit still at Kilkerran are upward pointing rather than downward. So that would technically give
Mhm.
you a lighter spirit. I think that doesn't fully offset the double distillation versus the 2.5 distillation at Springbank. So you do get still quite a more fatty, slightly more oily style, and a more malty style as well. I think the flavours from the malt carry through a bit more into Kilkerran.
Mhm. Well, lots of good feedback on that. Lots of nice comments on the chat there. Um, so the next one that's in the lineup here, Randall, I'm not trying to rush things along too quickly, but hoping to give a little bit of time for people who have questions that they want to ask, is the Amontillado cask.
Mm.
And this has been a bit of a series. So I think, is this the third or the fourth now in the series?
This is the third one where
Third, right.
we're right in the middle, the third of five.
So, I mean, what's interesting in all this is that way back when Kensington was able to buy a couple of Springbank casks, all of them 96 vintage, they were all different sherry casks. We did an Oloroso and a Manzanilla, but there was Amontillado, Fino, I don't know if Palo Cortado. There was six different ones at that time,
Yeah.
and three of those cask types have shown up now. Is it going to be a similar mix for this series or a little different?
Um, Similar, as in we're still using Manzanilla, Fino, Amontillado. Um, Palo Cortado's new to the series. We'd never really used that until Finlay sourced some of those casks
Mhm.
for us, which actually has probably been one of the biggest revelations in recent times. Is how good, not just for maturing whiskey, but how good Palo Cortado sherry actually is. That was a big
Mhm.
discovery for me. But yeah, that's the new one. I think the sixth one we would have been doing back in filling in the mid-90s was cream sherry,
Oh, yeah.
which is I think a very British thing. I don't know how many Although I noticed, I can't remember who it was, but I saw a couple of releases this week from, I don't know if it was another independent bottler or what, who was talking about using cream sherry casks again.
Yeah, I know Hunter Lang has used quite a few, like a
Yeah.
lot of like canasta cream sherry casks. I mean, to be fair, I remember back in the days when Harvey's Bristol Cream was still popular. I mean, at one point when I started about 20 years ago, we would be going through almost a case of it a week.
Wow.
And it a little over time, it just, I don't know if the people drinking it died off, but just
Probably what it
demand
was.
just kept going like this until a certain point we're like, well, why are we even stocking this anymore? But yeah, I don't think it's something that we've seen a lot of, although we are starting to see a bit more of that creeping in different bottlers programs.
Yeah. I think it might have been one of the new distilleries that was offering some casks, and I think one of the ones you could buy was cream sherry. It was
Oh, is it Kythe?
Hythe, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
You could also, for a steal, get an 80-year-old bodega sherry cask filled. So
yeah,
um,
that's something different.
I'm not sure that it was actually a steal, but an interesting opportunity to get to buy a 80-year-old bodega cask. So what was the inspiration behind this range? Was it to explore different sherry profiles on spirit?
Yeah, exactly that. There weren't that many of us left to remember those 96 and 97 single casks, and probably 99% of the sherry casks we ever filled were Oloroso, and it's pretty well established the effect Oloroso has on Springbank and every other distillery as well, obviously. And so we thought it would be quite interesting to do something a bit different for our own purposes, but also to present our whiskey in a very different way to people. And I think Finlay had gone on a trip to visit Miguel Martin, our sherry cask supplier, and came back absolutely full of the joys of sherry. And was like, oh, it'd be great if maybe we'll buy some more casks and fill them. And I was like, okay, if we're going to do that, let's make it a thing. Let's not just buy a handful and then we'll know what it's like. Let's just go all in on it, and let's bottle some Springbank from each of the different sherry types. And then the conversation turned to, well, how do we do it so it's an equal comparison, or what do we think? So we came up with this little five release series where we kind of gauged or took a bit of a guess at what we thought would be the most impactful casks. So fairly clear PX was going to have a bigger, quicker impact. So we thought, well, we don't necessarily want to do a 5-year PX finish. We don't just want to do a 1-year finish because that's more of a rinse through rather than actually letting it work. So we kind of hit upon this doing them all at 10 years old. Sort of in the first one, the PX was 7 years bourbon, 3 years PX. Then the Palo Cortado was 6 years bourbon, 4 years Palo Cortado. This one's 5 and 5. Next year's Fino will be 4 years in bourbon, 6 years in Fino. And then the last one, the Manzanilla, will be 3 years in bourbon, 7 years in Manzanilla. So we were trying to get the balance to be as close as possible. They're all bottled at 55% ABV as well for comparison purposes. So we're discovering quite a lot from it ourselves.
Is it something that you think will be, I mean, replicated in a more consistent scale down the line? Or is it the sort of thing where just to get the volume of these things would be too difficult to be able to do that?
No, we're filling reasonable, by our standards, reasonable quantities of our whiskey into these now. So through this series and through some other things we've done, we're pretty familiar now. We've developed a pretty good understanding of the impact of each of the different cask types on Springbank over varying periods of time. The one thing we've started to do, but we've not obviously got the results of it yet, is filling new make into these casks to see where that's going to go. So we're filling new make into all of these different sherry types every year. And so we'll see how that's working out. We've obviously got some decisions to make about the future, because as I say, we doubled production 7 years ago. So that's not really touched any of our core products yet. When the youngest one we've bottled so far is a 10-year-old, then we're still 3 years away from that extra whiskey coming through. But we're not all of a sudden going to have double the amount of whiskey available on the market. That's not the approach. So we've got extra whiskey now kicking about. So what are we going to do with that? How are we going to present it? And that's the conversations we're having. And using different types of sherry will be part of that.
So that, I think, is a good lead into the question that's in the chat there from Chad, saying he'd heard a rumor that you might add an 8-year-old to the lineup.
He heard part of a rumor and almost got it right. We're actually adding a 5-year-old to the lineup.
Well, we've seen quite a few of those for the Springbank Society over the years.
So the two society releases we did, the bourbon version and the sherry version, they were like test balloons that we were floating up there, because we knew that we liked them, but we wanted to kind of try and gauge what our people thought of them. And I think the feedback on those was, 90% positive, probably. There was the odd, I don't want 5-year-old Springbank, I want 10-year-old Springbank or whatever, but that's not necessarily objectively judging the whiskey. That's maybe just going, no, I want older. So the feedback from the Society bottles convinced us that to actually release something of that age wouldn't be a terrible idea. So we're doing it, we're introducing it as the Springbank 100 proof. So it's going to be bottled at 57.1 ABV, but it is going to say aged 5 years. We're not hiding from that. We're not doing a no age statement thing. We're very much saying, yeah, it's 5 years old, and here it is what it is. It's going to be 100% bourbon matured. So very much in that raw, natural, spirit forward style. So
even though Springbank is the core Springbank spirit is lighter peated than Longrow, I think having it at that younger age is going to kind of accentuate some of those elements of the spirit that maybe fade a little bit with time. Just sticking to the Amontillado here, because I know we've gone off of that a little bit, which is a style of sherry similar but different to Fino. Like Fino, it starts with the floor on top, but then it transitions to more of an oxidative style. And I mean, I love this on the palate. A lot of people saying how much they love the nose, but I love the palate because it's giving you these light elements of sherry, giving you those light touches of leather, tobacco creeping in there, but it's softer and allowing kind of more like distillate fruit character to shine through than would maybe be the case with some other sherry casks.
Yeah. For me, a good Springbank from an Oloroso cask is a fine whiskey, no problem. But I feel like there's a bit of a theme developing here. But I think, as you say, the lighter sherry influence strikes a better balance for me in presenting Springbank character with the influence of the cask. And that's not to do down in Oloroso Springbank. Springbank 15 is a fine dram, but there's maybe a bit more complexity to these, a bit more to them, and I think that's maybe slightly harsh on our Oloroso matured Springbanks because they're complex enough as it is, but these are just different and presented in a different way, and yeah, really nice.
Yeah, no, it's got a nice freshness to it. And just maybe one last question about this series. When you were thinking about releasing them and, how long to finish each of them, how much strategy was there in that to try to have a fair comparison, but also not allow any of them to overcook?
We did a fair amount of research into the sherry itself, and by research, when you're going to use it to mature your whiskey, the best way to get to know it is to enjoy it. So we learned a lot about the taste of sherry. So a lot of hard work went into it, but yeah, I think internally we always reserved the right to not stick too rigidly to 7, 3, 6, 4, 5, 5, 4, 6, 3, 7. So we were quite prepared for some of them a little bit further down the line to actually be pulled out of cask a bit earlier. We were Aye, we were nervous is probably too strong a word, but we had kept a close eye on the next two, the Fino and the Manzanilla, because we just thought, well, we're starting to get into 6 and 7 year finishes. Maybe 5 will be plenty, but based on what we were tasting as we went through them, it's actually working out all right. So a little bit of gut instinct, a little bit of knowing our own product, and then tasting the sherries themselves seemed to go all right. I don't know if you guys seen the little graph we have of the sherries. I'm going to do something daft here and maybe try and share my screen, which
Yeah, go for it.
It's a while since I did a Zoom tasting, so let's see if I can figure this out. No, you definitely don't need to see my emails. You definitely don't need to see that document. That's for sure. That'll get me into trouble. No, not happening. What I'll maybe do, Andrew, is I'll ping it to you if you don't mind.
Sure. Yep.
That might be easier than.
No problem. While you're doing that, there's a question here about whether there might be a Madeira release upcoming.
There will be. We don't have a set date in the plan for it, but we've got a reasonable quantity of Springbank in Madeira. So yeah, we'll definitely be looking at that, because we've done a couple of Madeira releases in the past that I think have been pretty decent. Albeit Madeira is another one of these cask types that I think you do have to be a little bit careful with. It's not always necessarily my favourite, but paired with something like Springbank or even Longrow, I think it can work quite well.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's been good ones for sure. I mean, I remember a Madeira cask society bottling that was spectacular way back when. But yeah, then there's the others. One question I should probably ask, because Harmony, if she was on this, would want to know, will we continue to see the Longrow Red series, or is that something that's been phased out?
Longrow Red is kaput. It is done. I don't know. Well, fundamentally, we are running out of old Longrow. We don't really have any Longrow reaching double digits in age anymore. And so, because the majority of the Longrow Red releases, maybe a couple of the more recent ones have been younger, but the majority of those releases were 10, 12, 13 years old, that kind of thing. Well, we don't have whiskey in cask reaching that age to do it the same way. So we've kind of exhausted most wine varietals or most regions. We've never quite managed a North American wine, which was a frustration. Getting Andy, if he's in or is listening, and Andy was trying hard to set me up with a couple of people, and we got pretty close a couple of times, and then things happened. But yeah, Longrow Red in its form is pretty much done. But the Longrow 100 proof, that I don't know if it'll have made its way to you guys yet.
I mean, it was rare as hen's teeth, but it did go into our last Springbank tasting that we did. Yeah. So people got a chance to try it.
So the Longrow 100 proof is always going to have a red wine matured element to it. Not going to be necessarily finished, not necessarily going to be fully red wine, but there's going to be, because we still, the beginnings of Longrow Red was because I liked the influence that the tannins from the wine had on the salty, peaty style of the whiskey, and I thought, done right. It was a 14-year-old Longrow Burgundy wood expression we did a number of years back that kind of struck that chord. So that was the kind of inspiration for it, and I still think it, in the right measures, the right doses, red wine and Longrow do work pretty well together. So the 100 proof is kind of the nod to that, so to speak. Yeah, no more red. Not to say we won't do some limited bottlings of Longrow from red wine casks, but
right. I mean, not to skip ahead, because we've still got one whiskey to do before we get to the Longrow 18. Does this mean that there likely might be some years where we don't see 18 bottled because of stock issues?
You may well find that the one we're going to taste tonight is the last ever bottling of Longrow 18.
Oof.
Yeah, where we operate a kind of, well, a relatively firm 5-year bottling plan, and not so much firm in terms of the dates, because that would be a nightmare, but we kind of know what we're going to release for the next 5 years, and there's no 18-year-old Longrow in there at all. Again, just with production having been fairly sporadic of Longrow and Hazelburn, touched on that earlier, but there just wasn't a lot of it about. And then, yeah, to get enough out there for people to drink over the last few years just kind of exhausted supply completely.
Fair. All right. Well, somewhat sad, but we get to taste it still, so that's exciting. Let's mosey on to the 12-year-old cask strength here. And I will put it up, make sure we got the right batch. Let's see on the site, 12-year cask strength
56.2, I think, is that right?
56.2. So it looks like you've got the new one on the site. So I don't have that one here, but I'll do some digging if you want to start talking about that, Ranald, and I'll go find some specifics on it.
Sure. I think you know, we talked about batch variation earlier, and I saw someone in the comments had very much hit the nail on the head when they said, you know, if you're looking for the epitome of batch variation, the 12-year-old cask strength is it, because the first few bottlings I think we did were relatively consistent in terms of their cask makeup. It was about 60 to 70% sherry, 30% bourbon, so the kind of flip of Springbank 10. But since those early days, the batch makeup has varied hugely with the 12-year-old. We've had 100% bourbon versions, we've had really sherried versions, we've had ones like this that are a bit of a, you know, a mixture of mercies almost, bourbon, sherry, and rum. So yeah, I think it's actually become a pretty much a hallmark of this particular bottling, this particular part of our line, that it is going to be weird and wonderful and different from time to time, which is fine. You know, we talked about the benefits of batch variation and how hopefully everybody on the call here is into that. So why not?
Well, back in the good old days, Ranald, when you know, we would have Springbank 12 cask strength on the shelf, which I know is probably a mind-blowing concept for most people in recent years. And there's at least one customer on this this chat in particular on this tasting who would email me and be like, describe the flavor profile of the 12-year, because like he would buy it or not depending on what the sherry profile was. And again, those were innocent times in the long ago, back when I suppose the world had not fully discovered Springbank yet. And it was kind of the preserve of people that knew and loved the brand.
COVID's got a lot to answer for.
COVID, I think the fire had been lit. I think COVID poured gas on it.
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's fair.
But it's a nice profile. I mean,
I see someone's sort of mentioned that the only problem with this is that you can't get it, which is generally fair comment. The good news is we are looking at increasing the volumes of this one that are available as we sort of approach that period where we've got a bit more stock to work with. We'll try and grow the 12-year-old availability probably quicker than anything else, because we appreciate that people appreciate it, and it's, you know, it's nice to have a sort of higher proof version out there. I know the new 5-year-old's going to be higher proof, but as you get older in age, it'll be nice to have a bit more of that kind of cask strength style out there. So I can't promise it's coming tomorrow, but it's coming. It's coming.
Yeah. Well, it's got a nice balance to it. And even though there's no red wine casks in this, there is almost something like slightly tannic that reminds me a little bit of, you know, like a strawberry note, but also combined with like a leather cigar pouch.
Yeah, it's just such a different beast. It's not, you know, it's not sherried the way the 15-year-old is. It's certainly a lot less bourbon influenced than the 10-year-old, but it finds a kind of crazy middle ground where it's almost bigger than the 10, and not just because of the alcohol, but that actual robust style is very much there.
Alan saying, any promise of more 12-year cask strength is still in good faith. So there you go.
Absolutely.
Might have to wait a little bit, but
Yeah,
couple,
but
three,
it'll get,
4 or 5 more years.
yeah, maybe sooner. Maybe we've been maybe sitting at them. I'm conscious that you and Andy will hold me to anything I say here, and the fact that you're recording it for YouTube, so I'm not going to say too much. But
Yeah.
you know, we share much of the frustrations that everyone else does. You know, for all, you know, people probably think we have the easiest jobs in the world. Trying to sell Springbank is such a tough gig, but it's not nice not having enough whiskey for people.
Yeah.
I think if we were, you know, if we were selling products that were less, not even whiskies, but you know, if you're in the business of selling something that's highly desirable and everybody wants it, and that's great and all's well and good, but we appreciate why people enjoy our whiskey, and to know that people want more of it for the right reasons. They don't want, okay, there have been people who want more of it so they can make some profit on it themselves, but there are people who want to get it and want to drink it, and it's not nice knowing that we can't supply that. I think things are changing. You know, I think demand and that kind of secondary market isn't what it was. It's maybe leveling off, if not dropping a bit. And so hopefully that'll coincide with us having some greater availability, and people will be able to start getting a bit more availability. That would be nice.
Well, I mean, both Andy and I can empathize with that, because yeah, it's, I think when there's something that's so desirable that everyone wants, and there's never a way to satiate demand, it becomes difficult, and doesn't matter how you manage it, people aren't happy with you. But I think, you know, the challenge with Springbank is, even with the secondary market going, there's so much greater awareness of the brand now amongst people who are whiskey fans, that I think even though maybe the speculative side of things will die down, there's still going to be people clamoring for it because they haven't tried it, or they don't have enough, or, you know, all these different things. I think those are better problems to have. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, that, you know, some of this will be alleviated in the future years, is great. But yeah, I think it's still a testament to the fact that one of the things I respect about Springbank is that you offer your prices, your products at fair prices, regardless of the demand for them. And you know, there's a number of companies that take this approach, and I have great respect for it. So much so that I remember seeing a few years ago, and it's something that made me feel good about the way we deal with things, was there was a memo sent out to, I suppose, to an email group, but one of the things in it was reminding retailers to sell the product for a fair price, because there were people that were taking advantage of it because they could. And I think one of the things that Springbank has, you know, that people love, is this integrity about the way you do business, and not wanting to see people take advantage of your customers as part of that.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, and thanks for the work you do in helping us preserve that as well, because it is you know, it's not a supply chain. I mean, it is, because that's what it is, but we want our stuff to go to the right people via the right people, because everybody wins if you do it right and fair. Nobody loses if you do that. So, you know, it's a very big thing for us, is trying to, in a lot of places it's illegal to control pricing, but you know how we do it, and it is important, and those who play the game should do better than those who try to cheat the rules. Because, you know, if we didn't have people who wanted to drink our whiskey, there'd be absolutely no point in any of it. And so it's about looking after, as far as we possibly can, the guys who are drinking the whiskey, because that's what it's for. That's what it's about. It's not about making massive profits. It's not about looking after those who've got all the money or whatever. It's getting your whiskey to the people who want to drink it. You know what, you talk about other things we could have done to try and preserve supply in certain places. You know, we could have walked away from some countries and just said, sorry, you can't get any more of that because we're giving it all to Alberta, for example.
Hmm.
But, you know, the importer we work with in whichever country that might be would get over it. They'd have other things they could sell. But the Springbank fan in whichever country, Australia, would be the one who misses out. And that's not fair on them, because they've probably been drinking Springbank since before I was born.
Yeah.
Probably not that old, but close enough, you know. And so you need to try and get it to the people who should get it. And that's very, very hard, but we try and do what we can.
Yeah. I think this kind of, for me, ties into, you know, the future of the Scotch whiskey industry, which, um, you know, the industry's gone through 20 years of uninterrupted growth and has started to like go through an adjustment phase there. And I think one of the reasons why the approach you've taken, and there's a few other just companies, like I'll look at Ben Romick is a good example of that too, where they've always tried to keep their prices fair. And there's other companies out there too, is a recognition that, you know, markets are cyclical, you know, consumer demand can be fickle. And, you know, if you treat your customers with respect, they'll remember that when, you know, things come full circle. And I think that that's kind of an ethos that's always been important to a business like yours, and is probably one of the reasons why, you know, Headley was so cautious about making changes, about growing things, because he wanted to kind of have a level of stability there. And you know, a lot of the companies that I think have profiteered on the last 5 to 8 years might come to rue some of those decisions, because when things come as they are around full circle and people have choices, are they going to continue to overpay for certain things, or are they going to go back to looking for companies that offer good quality and good value? And I honestly think that that's where things are going. So
I hope so. I hope so. And I think that speaks to, you know, we talked about experience a little bit in terms of how it affects the whiskey you make, the experience of your staff, the experience of your people, but the experience of our ownership over a huge number of years led us to this position of, well, don't get too excited when things are good and don't get too sad when things are bad, because Headley had seen it all before. You know, the distillery struggled through the 80s and early 90s, nearly didn't get there, nearly didn't make it out the other side. So he vowed never ever to suffer that way again. And so we're, you know, yeah, the downside of that is not enough product at the moment, but the upside of that is knowing exactly how to ride out a crisis and how to get through the good times without ruining your reputation.
Yeah, fair point. All right, so Ranald, I'm going to share the screen here in a second. The last whiskey in our range tonight is the Longrow 18, and as as you told us, the last Longrow 18 that people are going to see for a wee while, or possibly ever, because maybe it's not replaced with an 18-year-old, maybe it's replaced with something else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'd quite like to bring a 14-year-old Longrow back, because I thought the 14-year-old Longrow was a cracking whiskey, a bit more sherry influenced. I thought that worked really well with the peat. And so it's maybe more likely that we'd see a 14 coming before, certainly time-wise before an 18, but maybe we'd get to 14 and bottle all the whiskey at that age or something. So the 18s have been, you know, another big example of batch variation, Longrow 18, because again, you're only dealing with the casks that make it that far through the maturation cycle. So what are we talking about this one? This is, yeah, very heavy in the sherry with a little bit of port in amongst it.
Yeah, here, let me put it up on the screen. I was just going to check out another thing, but I'll find it here. I do fondly remember that Longrow 14. The only thing I didn't love about it back then was the box that it came in.
Yeah. Our some may say our biggest flaw is our packaging, but not me.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that came out of COVID that is not a bad move at all was the decision you guys made to stop putting things in boxes. I mean, with the exception of maybe some higher end releases, because ultimately I don't think people really care. And especially the kind of people that are buying whiskey of yours for the right reasons don't care. They're looking to drink it. And once you start drinking it, you're not going to keep putting it back in the box.
No, that was my feeling, you know. Yes, certain whiskies that maybe carry a certain price tag, you want to have a nice box to put it in, or what have you. But if you're buying a whiskey to open and drink, the box just gets in the way. So you're probably going to recycle it at best. So rather than having to recycle it, why just not bother with it in the first place? As long as the bottle's secure without it, then yeah, it's all good.
Well, Ranald, I don't know if you in your whiskey travels ever met Willie Tate from Jura.
Oh yeah.
Willie was in my store for a tasting one night, and thankfully it was all men. And why that will become apparent in just a moment. But Willie was presenting these new Juras that had come out from the late 70s, and they all came in wooden boxes. And he went on a rant about boxes. He says, I don't know why everyone cares so much about box. You can't eat box. And people started snickering because there's a connotation in North America for that word.
Yeah.
But his point was a really valid one, which was that, like, once you take it out and open it, even if it's a high-end bottle, you don't care about the box.
No, absolutely. It's, I think there are certain consumer products in the world where a nice box helps, like
Sure.
For better or worse, Apple package their products really nicely.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a new iPhone or a new watch or whatever, it comes in a nice box. It's actually quite tactile. It's nice to play with, but that's selling you electronic devices. That's not trying to sell you something you're going to open and consume and never need again. So yeah, no, boxes just get in the way.
Yeah. Well, this particular 18, I don't know if you caught it while I was up there, Ranald, but 90% sherry, 10% port.
Yeah.
So this is a fairly dark long row expression we have here.
Yeah. And I think we've found some maybe examples over the years of long row from those darker sherries or darker ports that have strayed too far into the car tires, that kind of side of things, whereas this one is on the right side of that line for me. It's nutty, it's tobacco, cigar box, it's that kind of stuff, which is all good, but we're always very wary of things straying too far the other way.
Yeah, it's not at all too meaty. You get a little bit of like a little bit of tar on the palate, but it's not. I mean, it's more of that earthy peat profile, just that really muddy peat. It's not that sort of. I mean, and it happens not very often with Springbank, but it can happen. Like you get the odd bottling that's got a faint sulfur note to it, but there's none of that in this. This is very clean. It's dirty, but it's very, very clean in profile.
Yeah. This actually puts me in mind a bit of some of the old long row 14s. They were fairly big on the sherry side. Certainly in the beginnings of the 14-year-old, latterly they maybe became a bit more 50-50, but and I think that works well for a technically heavily peated whiskey, although long row's peat is very different to most others. But that kind of background level of peat that you get with this sits really nicely with those flavors from the casks. It's pretty good on that.
Oh, it's got a nice profile to it. Ranald, you may know the answer to this question. If you don't, I think I do. But Doug, who was at Springbank School a couple of weeks back, asked, I came in a bit late, but was there any word on future society releases for Canada? And I think that's an interesting one because I believe it's a long row, isn't it? It's an older long row.
A long row 26-year-old.
So yeah, there's a small quantity of that coming, and I think we're getting half and half 375s and 700s.
Yeah.
Or 350s and 700s.
350s, yeah. Yeah, so we took the approach with that one. When we do our society bottles, we try to vary it up a bit. We believe that most society members, and certainly the good society members, are buying our stuff to drink it. So when we decide we've got a parcel of 26-year-old long row, oldest long row the distilleries ever bottled. We're like, well, they're pretty good, and people are going to want to know what that's all about. But if we put it out there at a couple of £100 a bottle or whatever, well, there are people even within the society who are going to get hold of that and flip it for vast profits on that. So we took the decision with this one that we would bottle some in 700s, some in 350s, because if you didn't want to, splash out the full money for a 70 or 700, you could, for half the price, get half the whiskey. So you're kind of satisfying maybe as many people as you possibly can with a release like that. And what we actually did was, I think maybe the bottles coming your way are slightly different, but we basically took pre-orders and said, right, who wants a 700, who wants a 350? And we bottled the numbers that were asked for, rather than not having enough for being left with too much. And I thought that was a different approach that we'd taken. I think it's the first time we've ever really bottled to order like that, and it kind of went quite well. It's a pain in the ass for bottling, but
I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and so yeah, ultimately we had to do things a little differently for Canada because so when they come, there'll be a ballot. People will have a choice between them. We'll figure that out shortly before they arrive, which I'm assuming will probably be sometime early in the fall, but or late summer. But yeah, people will get a chance at them, and we'll do our best to get people the size they want. But I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of these things are still limited. But yeah, it's cool that we're still able to get them. And I know people are certainly happy with that. For the last long row 18 for at least a long while, if not for forever, I think this is a lovely bottling.
Thank you. It might have been nice to do this one and be absolutely terrible, and then everyone would say, we're not going to miss it anyway. It's a good thing that you've stopped, but we seem to be going out on something of a high note.
Yeah. Emmett commenting 350 ml is a good decision. I think the feedback we've had from the Canadian members who've spoken with me is that I think when things are very limited, they're happy to get a 350. I mean, most people probably would love to have a 700, but if it's between that and not getting a bottle at all, I think people are grateful to have a chance to try it, including something like this, these tasting kits that are poured out, which I know just because we do them internally in our shop, I know that these are not as profitable for you as selling the bottles because they're small, they take work. It requires organization and planning and all those different things. So certainly I think all these little things that you guys do that give people a chance to try things are appreciated.
Thank you. It's important. You and I spoke about that before we let everyone else in. But if people can't get a bottle of something, at least if they can get a dram of it, then everybody's getting a little go at it. And maybe getting the dram just makes you miss the bottle even more. But at least you can. We're doing what we can to try and at least get some of it into people's glasses.
Well, and when it comes to getting a dram of some of these whiskeys, there's always a place you can do that. And that is the bar at the distillery.
The washback bar. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, I was thinking that as I was talking about the tasting packs, we have bottles of everything at the bar, primarily because if you make the journey to Campbelltown from almost anywhere in the world, it's not just a quick 5 minutes down the road. It is a bit of a trip. So there should hopefully be something nice waiting for you at the end of it. But, it's important that when you can offer a taste of something to people, that you do what you can to do that.
Well, Ranald, we're going to wrap up here shortly, but before we do, I wanted to just throw out there, if anyone has any questions that they want to ask quickly before we wrap, to put them in the chat. While you're doing that, or not, as it were, I do want to mention quickly, and there are 2 bottles available only for people that are actually logged in right now for the tasting. And we've got 2 bottles of Springbank 30-year-old available. If I have more than 2 requests for them, I will draw names tomorrow morning. Simply just email me, which is scotchguy@kensingtonwinemarket.com. You should be able to reply to the email that had the tasting details in it if you don't have my email address. The price is 2,000 plus GST, if you want them. But yeah, email me. Don't put it in the chat. I will forget. I will not get it. You have to send me an email, and I will draw names tomorrow morning, which means that literally only people who logged in here will have gotten that instruction. So that'll should increase the odds, if you're interested in one of those bottles, of actually getting one. And if you happen to put a memo in that note promising me that you're going to share it with friends, I don't know, maybe those odds will improve slightly. We'll see. So questions here. Shlomo apparently made an inappropriate joke. Sad that no one laughed at it. Francois, looking forward to visiting Springbank in a year or two. What's Dan got to say here? What's your handicap? That's not, I guess, is that not a public question, Ranald, or is it is that
Yeah,
a
my
private one?
handicap's whiskey consumption. It's 6. It was down at 4, but work and family keep getting in the way, so don't get to play as much golf as I would like.
That's, you got to retire for that, I think, Ranald.
Yeah,
but
I think I'm still a bit young for that, although it does cross your mind sometimes.
Absolutely. David asked here, can you share anything about the 2026 society releases?
I can share that we haven't chosen them yet, but we've started looking into it literally today. Just coincidentally had a conversation about what the next couple of society releases might look like. So we were looking at some Springbank and Sauterne casks. We've got some samples of that coming out of the distillery to the office, hopefully on Monday, if they're not there already. Madeira, funnily enough, as we were talking about earlier. So we're looking at a Springbank, probably not hugely old, back down to that kind of more regular bottling and price level. So yeah, a few things in the works. What we try to do, we've got quite a lot of small parcels of casks. So, you know, to be fair to Frank, he had less whiskey to work with than Finlay does, but with Frank, we had a lot of odd casks here and there, one of that or two of this or one of the other. And that you know, other than bottling it as a single cask, that doesn't give you a lot to work with. Finlay's very good at doing kind of 8 to 10 cask parcels of stock, so that for things like a society bottle or our Campbelltown Malts Festival releases or things like that, there's a bit more to work with. So yeah, a few things in the works. That was going to be Friday's job, and then we got hijacked with something else. So we might start the week with a wee society tasting.
That sounds like some tough work. Doug, this might be an inside joke / question, asking if Grant is better or worse.
I'm going to assume at golf. I don't know. His handicap's higher than mine.
All right.
So we'll
maybe that's the question. Maybe it's not. TN is asking what his top bottle behind him is. So someone's ogling the bottles behind you. Either that or they want to know what your favorite bottle is. That might be
that's what I was wondering. Is it favorite or is it
literally the top?
We've literally just redecorated this room that I'm sitting in, and we emptied out the old whiskey cabinet, and we found 146 open bottles in it. So we need to kind of have some kind of heel party to try and deal with them. So we've now got a new whiskey shelf, and so we're trying to shrink down the number of bottles there. But yeah, my favourite in there is a question. Somewhere in there's an not old 100 proof Springbank, but the 10-year-old 100 proof that we used to do with the black and red label. There's one of them in there that I think is brilliant. It goes back to that Springbank from bourbon thing that I really love, and I thought the old 10-year-old 100 proofs were perfect. It was the whiskey that really got me to hugely appreciate what Springbank makes when I first started working there. So there's a sentimental attachment, and it's a good whiskey. So that's my favourite that's up there.
All right, so I'll try to move some of these on. Chad Anderson saying he's got a picture with you from Victoria Whiskey Festival 2016. Any plans to return to Canada? And then Frank Hudson from the Victoria Whiskey Festival says, we'd love to have you at the 20th Victoria Whiskey Festival in January. Don't have to necessarily answer those now, but putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I hope to return to Canada before too much longer. It's that's back in the aspiration rather than plan
Yeah.
folder. But yeah, I mean, I coming to Canada was always the highlight of my year. My job's changed slightly, and I don't get out and about too much. But I think maybe if we can swing some more availability of stock, there'll be more scope for Springbank to be present at festivals. And yeah, I mean, I certainly hope to get back. I remember the last time I came over, I'd said it had been, I think it was 2017 or something, and at that point it had been 3 or 4 years since I'd last been, and I'd said, "Oh, I don't want to ever leave it that long again." And well, I haven't been back since then. So
that didn't have anything to do with the like dozen or so beers you and I had after the tasting, did it?
no, that should have encouraged me to come back, not kept me away, to be honest. But no, I definitely do need to get back. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to see you. Emmett asking, any plans for future wood finishes? And this is going to blow your mind. Enjoyed our tasting on May 11th, 2012, which is very specific / quite a long time ago.
Wow. Yeah. Plans for that kind of thing. We're looking at what might succeed the sherry series. So when it's over in a couple of years, what are we going to start releasing that's of interest at that point? You can't really do a bourbon series, although we've now got whiskey in casks from some different American whiskey producers, so there might be a little bit of that there. But yeah, looking at things like wood finishes again, wood expressions, that kind of stuff. So you might well see some of that coming through in the not too distant future, Emmett.
All right, this might be the last question, but it's a good one because I can see one of them behind you. Any plans to resurrect Rundlets and Kilderkins? And before you answer that, I want to say I love that you used that label style for the 1998 vintage.
Thanks. Yeah, I've been looking for a reason to use that label again for a while. No huge plans to resurrect it. Unfortunately, it's just incredibly difficult to do. These small casks, they're hard to get hold of, is the first thing. You've almost got to have them not quite custom made, but there's a lot of work goes into getting them, and then the kind of trade-off between what you have to do to get them and what you get out of them is good in a whiskey side of it, but it's a tough gig. So sadly not, because again, that was one of my favorites, especially the Springbank Randalls and Kilderkins. I thought was awesome.
Yeah, that was a pretty awesome.
I think it's the long row I've still got kicking about up there because my wife also really enjoys that one. But yeah, it was good stuff.
Yeah. Well, listen, Ranald, I think we should probably cut this at this point because I'm conscious that it's getting quite late. I want to thank everybody who took time to tune into the tasting tonight. I want to thank Andy Dunn from Gold Medal Marketing, who's on and off, kept getting kicked out, but he got back on for the tasting. Reminder, if you're interested in one of those Springbank 30-year-olds, I will decide who gets to purchase them tomorrow morning. And if I have more requests than bottles, I will draw names from it. So please do that. Ranald, big thank you to you and Melanie and everyone for arranging this tonight. And thanks everybody. I hope you have a great summer.
Yeah, thanks, folks.
All right, Ranald. Well, hopefully bump into you sometime in the not too distant future. But for now, thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, good. Thanks a lot, Andrew. Cheers.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.